My career has been really focused around one singular set of issues, which is I love art. I just adore it. I love looking at art museums. I love creating works of art and people, and getting people to fall passionately and forever in love with works of art. And I was lucky enough to go with my mother when I was 10 years old to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and saw 3 paintings there, and it changed my life. And so I went off to college and decided I would work in an art museum and become an educator, and this is what I would do with my life. And guess what? When I graduated from Sweetbriar with I had forgotten one thing, that instead of majoring in economics as my study, I should have majored in art history. And so I had my interview at the National Gallery of Art, and Maggie Boughton said to me, "There's only one problem with you. You have no art history degree, and we don't hire people that don't have Masters of Arts degrees to do anything but sell books in the bookstore." So I realized I had to reinvent myself and went back and seriously studied art history, but never gave up my love of it, connecting people and art. So my entire career has been focused on that chapter of believing in the power of art and finding new ways for people to experience it. I was invited, Charles was there when I got there, to the Dallas Museum of Art in 2000, and followed. It's very interesting because I had the most wonderful afternoon going around your amazing museum, which is huge. You don't ever have to build again. Let me just assure the trustees of this, you have enough space. Don't put that on your vision quest. The question is how to get more people in here and to make the extraordinary use of what you do have. So I think you leave that for several generations. And Charles, I think, would agree with me. It's big enough. But going around with a person who loves the collection and sees it in different ways, we had a wonderful opportunity. And one of the moments that I really loved was when we were standing in front of the Van Dyck, who was 18, and then turned the corner a few galleries later and saw this amazing portrait by Rembrandt when he was 24. And it reminded me in that moment of some of the work I'm doing at the University of Texas at Dallas, which is working with students, creating new digital games for the Perot Museum of Natural History based on the students' creative responses. And these are students in the same age range. And so I'm going to take these images back. I'm going to get copies from Charles and take them back to show the students that, who knows, they may end up in a museum someday with their new digital games. But it's that exploration of creativity and individuals, and here they are hundreds of years later hanging in your museum, and then they should be inspiring a whole new generation about creativity and the exploration of the new, because both of those artists really broke boundaries. So I'm going to fly through. I'm going to look at my timing. I promise this will be about 15 or 20 minutes, which means I have to talk fast. Like every museum, we're driven by the mission. When Max Anderson, who succeeded me, came, he changed the mission, and which is, of course, what museum directors often do. And ours was very focused on the visitors, and you can see that now the museum is very focused on a lot of new issues about the cultural heritage and the focus on the collections. We did both, but they're both important things to do. My story, and I'm without even knowing, talking too much to Charles, but knowing our great love of art, the work that I did in Dallas was heavily, heavily focused on the collections because it is our single biggest asset financially. It's what we care for, it's what people give to. And so I believe fundamentally and strongly in the power of the collections. And so there's so much work that you can do up there. You also need special exhibitions, but every special exhibition we did connected to the collections. Just like you in Indianapolis, we have an encyclopedic collection with different strengths and weaknesses and different collections that are acquired over time. We have Wendy Reeves, you have the Clues galleries, which are amazing, and there's one that you should just completely make a salon for music and poetry readings and everything. I'd go right in there tomorrow. So it's very, very similar in, we're not as big as you. I always thought we were a big museum, but we're not as big as you. And this is just a host of the different kinds of programs and initiatives that we did around the collections, everything from, you know, getting visitors to use new technology in the Reeves collection, to also really focusing on one summer we had in the financial crisis, had to cancel our show, and so we did Summer Spotlight, which was taking movies and taking people all around the museum looking at superheroes and love stories and other kinds of things. So using the narrative of the collection in new ways was a big part of it. Charles referenced the book that I wrote, Ignite the Power of Art, with a colleague of mine, and it's based on 7 years of research. And when I got to Dallas, one of the things I observed is you could roll a bowling ball down the Barnes building and not hit anybody. Charles had, you know, it was kind of, you know, people came. There were about 275,000, maybe 300,000 people who came. But it was a very selected audience, very homogeneous, very, and I went out and interviewed 450 people all over the community because I was not familiar with Dallas. I had come from San Francisco. I had now moved to the buckle of the Bible Belt. I had a lot to learn. And what was interesting is I realized at the end of that we needed to understand our visitors in a different way and put them at the center of the experience, and that we needed to really do some research that was not the traditional museum research, but to understand how people engage with works of art, what really motivates people to come to the museum, what motivates them to look. And that need, then we had to change as an institution. So you could know the information, but if you weren't willing to change, then everything would fail. And so that meant getting a commitment from our trustees and from our staff, and all the staff, from the person who was the guard to the person who was the senior curator working with me. So we hired Randy Korn and worked with her, and we did 7 or 8 years of research, 6 studies, 3,432 people. Is it ever enough, is what my staff would ask me. And we did a lot of our work through cluster analysis and different methodologies, and learned a huge amount. And every time we got a study back, there was an all-staff, all-board meeting, and everybody had to show up. I mean, it was really, really critical for every single person in the museum to understand the study, and then we would set up task forces to innovate change. So what is the framework? Well, in the book, if you actually have a copy that you could pass around if you want to, as long as just pass it to the first person, goes that way. There's a framework. We worked on identifying 4 different sectors of our audience, and we wanted to cluster our statements, was the phrase that the evaluator used, around knowledge and background of works of art. And we learned a huge amount about how people experience works of art and what makes a memorable memory. And if you can create a memory that is multidimensional, meaning uses both your sight and your sound and, you know, in some cases smell, and then you could capture the imagination and people would be more likely to come back. And we wanted to understand deeply their comfort level, and this is one of the big variants that we found out. And who was enthusiastic about art and passionate about it, and who didn't care. That was really important. Let's see. So we found out that we had 4 clusters. What's interesting is that the number, that you are not exclusively in any one cluster, and there's a lot in the research, which is all online, and also in the book that talks about the crossovers. So we had people that were observers who walked in for the first time, usually with friends, and needed help and just want to know, where am I and how do I get around? And then we had people who just couldn't stop participating in everything, but the problem was that they they had an art background, but it wasn't as complete. And then we had people like a lot of us who are on staff that are independents. We want to go into the galleries all by ourselves. and look all alone. And many artists feel the same way. We only want to learn from experts because we're skilled at looking. And then we found the enthusiasts, and one of our colleagues, who Charles and I knew worked with for years, Ann Bromberg, said, these people love art as much as sex and religion. And so we love them, but the problem was we were programming and spending all our marketing dollars on an audience that will naturally come. And so a big shift happened when we did a lot of analysis of our revenues and how we were spending money in education and in marketing and in development, and we realized that that audience is going to come. We don't have to reinvent them or do, they're going to come as long as we're doing really good things. What we needed to do was get those independents and participants and observers coming to the museum. So that's what we focused on. In the book and in the research, there's lots and lots of information, and you can ask me about it, but not surprisingly, the observers really, they just want to know where they are and what they should be looking at. They just want help. And the more helpful you are, the better off. They want to understand the meaning. Why is this important and why is it here? And they really want the staff to help them in the galleries and in informal ways. And they want volunteers to help them. They just want somebody to be nice. And so we had to do a big turnaround in that area. The participants were 24% of our on-site visitors. And this was a group that kind of broke out because they enjoy learning socially. And that social aspect, and you have these wonderful education spaces that are up there that I want to really compliment your team on, Stuart and others, because it's really exciting to see, visitors just sort of going in and sitting down and creating things or having a conversation. And that they want to learn and they want it to be social. That is their main characteristics. That's why we call them the participants. And they love interdisciplinary programs. They love them in the galleries so that they can learn why Shiva dances a certain way, or what the rhythms of the African drums are, or what kind of music was really being played at the time of Bouguereau, or what would somebody today do with that in, if you took music or poetry, who adapted it as a contemporary artist. So we really focused on them. And they love storytelling. They love the narrative. And so that became a really big part of what we focused on. The independence, I hate to tell you, but that was we found out that we were artists and museum professionals and people who have a very high level of knowledge about looking at art. They're confident, and they want to come to the museum and really hear the experts talking, and they want to, they like materials and techniques. I mean, everybody does, but they really want to know more about the technical side. And they are not as interested in big crowds. This is the group that we want to say to them, do not come to late night. Because if you come to late night when there are 3,000 to 5,000 people, you're going to be miserable. But they come. They come anyhow. And then the last one was the group that Anne so aptly described. The enthusiasts know about art. They have a great background many times in art history or have taken art, but they, and studio art, and they love telling people what they know. They love sharing information, but they're your natural audience. And so when we went through tough financial times at DMA, similar to what you did in Indianapolis, the museum we didn't have any new money. I thought we were going to have new money, but we didn't. And so we had to reallocate or re-engineer, whatever word you want to do, and redistribute the funds so that we were capturing new audiences and building them, and not just targeting the traditional audience. So the big thing for Dallas is we had this backdrop of research coming in over and over and over again over a number of years. And then what we really, my job was to focus on institutional change, which I know from Charles and senior staff that you're in the middle of, and embarking on this kind of institutional change, which it takes time. I just want to say that over again. It takes time, and it's not easy. we focused on our mission very much. We were very focused on the collections and on art experiences, whether it was with new artists in our community or the new acquisitions or the collections that had been up for years. We did a lot of reinstallations. Charles walked me through some of the ones that you did. There are only 2 galleries that didn't get changed during my tenure. One was under planning and ready to do, which was African, and pre-Columbian was the next one up. We focused on excellence. We always want to be excellent, but what does that mean, and how do you calibrate that, and how do you allow people to make mistakes so that you can become more excellent? And that's a part of business. It's part of creativity, and the museum needs to be a place to allow that to happen. We were very audience-focused, and the staff learned over and over, and I hear that in the senior staff and in Charles's leadership, on the issue of how do we get more people in the building and get them to come back with even more people. And word of mouth is, as we all know, the greatest way to make that happen. So how do you do that in a changing world? We never gave up research, which I firmly believe in, and was lucky enough to have a trustee to fund these studies, which I get asked this question all the time. So it was over 8 years. We probably spent between about $200,000, so it wasn't all that much in the end to really do the studies. The real issue was doing the experiments and training the staff. That was the real issue, and the trustees helped to make that a part of the culture. And experiments. I am a great believer in throwing the ball up into the air and the blue balloon up into the air and trying something out as long as you learn. So it became a landmark in our culture. Since I left, as you know, Max and Rob Stein have gone to Dallas and have changed admission to being free. We went through the agony of being free, charging admission, and then now under Max's leadership, the museum is free again. And they have a new program called Friends, which I know you know about, which is membership under $100, quote unquote membership under $100. You become available to the museum, but you don't get parking. And so in Dallas, you can do a lot of things, but not have free parking is really a motivator. In fact, they want valet parking. Let's be perfectly honest, right, Charles? They want even more specifically, many times the Nasher and the DMA will do valet parking because we just have to. But, and then they have the Partners program, which is $100 and above, and you get free admission, certain number of tickets to exhibitions, and the all-important free parking, really important free parking. So that has changed, and there's all these badges and great new programs. We did not have the technology when I was there to do this kind of gallery tracking. I mean, we barely got into wireless technology into the galleries because that's what we could do, and we had limited funds. But today, you can do so much more with your apps and your tracking of your visitors. That's very, very exciting to be able to link this into, and I give a lot of credit to Rob Stein to trying to use the framework and then push it ahead by these new initiatives. So I'm going to talk very briefly about and give you some specific examples about changes at the DMA, and just talk in the beginning about how hard change is. I joined the museum, and Charles was there for about a year and a half, I think, and before he went off to Cleveland, and a bigger museum with many more resources than we have. The operating budget of the DMA is about $24 million. When I left, it was 26, and plus the city support. And it's a building of about 450,000 square feet, plus the garage, the all-important garage, and the other thing that we have were small gardens, a beautiful one by Kylie, not the great estates and gardens that you have around here. The big focus for us was, as I mentioned, on our collections, and I'm going to give you 2 examples of some of the favorite shows that we did. One was All the World's a Stage, and when the new Performing Arts Center was opening downtown, we were penniless and poor. There was just no other phrase for it. And then I went to the curators and said, it doesn't matter. We have to fill up the special exhibition galleries. We had to cancel some shows. And so we took 125 works from the collection, and we did 200 programs around the exhibition called All the World's a Stage, and we had people involved in thousands of different ways. You can see the performers, you can see them in the galleries. We brought music, and we actually brought these collections together. So there were themes like the theater, there were the actors, there were the musicians, and you'll see some of this. And it was just so diverse. And visitors saw the collection in brand new ways. They had never, ever thought about these interconnections before, and that was one of the exciting things. We also, you can see this down at the lower left-hand side, had places that they could perform responding to works of art. So we made absolute use of every single inch of the special exhibition galleries. Our wonderful designers, all of these different museum collections that were highlighted had music, and visitors were, this is, of course, a shot taken by one of our art photographers who forgets about people, and then I would say, where are the people? What about the people? So yeah, he would take lots of shots, and yeah, really, I mean, really. But we also set up a stage in the center of it, and we did a lot of programming, and the visitors came, and more importantly, the artists came and responded to it. And when they weren't there, we had loops of talking to visitors that were available for the visitors, so they could sit down and hear artists talking about making music, about responding in the ways that they did creatively to the collection. So it became very interactive. And this is a good example, cross-section. Of course, Charles would recognize everything, the Mende trumpet, the beautiful trumpet from Peru, some different musical instruments overlaid with a Picasso where he's playing mandolin. And so there were these unusual juxtapositions that we really focused on. So that was one example of, what do you say, making lemonade out of lemons, a big empty gallery, a civic event. What are we going to do? Well, we did something, and it was hugely popular and it gave people a new way to look at the collections. And then, ironically, because I know you're having face-to-face come up soon, which sounds like a beautiful special exhibition on the Neo-Impressionists, we did one that was very focused on the international art at the museum. It was the last exhibition I did after completing the collections catalog with the curators. And this one, we took 60 works of art and did new juxtapositions between the works. And we were launching our smartphone tours. We were doing special lectures and late night tours. So it was just another adaptation about making the collections special, like a special exhibition. And whenever we did major exhibitions, like a beautiful one on Renoir in the book, we talk about how we would do a parallel exhibition on coastlines, because the Renoir was about the change of going from, in his work, through the Industrial Revolution, and when the whole coast of Brittany was opening up, and it was a really interesting show, but kind of didactic and a lot of photographs. And while there were beautiful Renoirs in it, you really had to dig deeply. And so we took our permanent collection and did beautiful installation of European and American and contemporary art, and then brought in sound artists and made sound poems and did all kinds of other things. And the curator, instead of writing traditional labels, wrote labels about using excerpts from literature and poetry about the coastline. So it was exciting. Technology, a big part of all of our museums, and the thing that we learned is don't claim any single platform, because the technology is so far ahead of us. We're just little paddlers on the stream, so don't give in to anybody. Just keep doing it and stay behind. All the offers you'll get to be Samsung's favorite, that's only a moment of time that they'll support you, and then they desert you. The second thing that we did was the Center for Creative Connections, and you kind of have a diverse version of that here, which I certainly applaud. And this is a 12,000 square foot area in the center of the museum that is focused on experience and on creativity and on connections with the community. So it does a lot of that work together. And again, very much focused on the collections and how we can bring innovation into that for every age, from preschoolers all the way up to senior citizens. So everybody participates in the center. And it is a rapidly changing place. I would say about every 2 years, the whole installations and all of the programming change. So go online and look at what they're doing. That's why I put this slide up there, so you can see what's really going on today. It's a big part of the museum. Engaging artists, that's a huge part of the criticism. A lot of our museums, I used to go out and whatever we did, it was never enough. We never bought enough art. We never did enough programming. We never did anything enough. And so I decided that we would really begin to document this, and found out that in a single year we had 750 artists involved in the museum in one way or another, whether they were doing programming or whether they were presenting or whether we bought their works of art. And once I began to have statistics like that, and also their creative minds were such an important part of our late night series and all of our other programs, it just, you can see the choreographing going on of the great Matisse dance. And then we commissioned works with one of the ballet companies so that students and teachers really studied Matisse and then took away from that themselves. They were changed by what they had seen and how they practiced their art form, but then they performed over and over and over again at the museum. So we became a center for creative responses to works of art, which is extraordinary, and people saw them in new ways. Late nights, the art doesn't go home, so why should you, was something that I believe strongly in. And as Charles knows, I'm a late night person, so you get emails from me at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had to be escorted out of the museum regularly by security, because the city closes the lights off, so they would know to come and get me and take me down to my car and shoo me out. So that's how we got that phrase, "The art doesn't go home, why should you?" And I was lucky enough to be in the gallery. So we do late nights that came out of our centennial when we were open 100 hours without ever closing the doors of the museum. I can't remember whether you were there at that time. You had already left. It was a tipping point event for the museum, because we didn't know. We had a lottery in the staff, and to see how many people they thought would come, and it ranged from 5,000 over 100 hours to about 50,000. And what happened is we had 45,000 people come in 2003 over the 100 hours, which is 450 people an hour walking through the door. And then we realized, okay, something is really changing here. And I happily gave these tours called My Favorite Things at 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm here to tell you that I had huge audiences, and they kept growing and growing. And then there were poets and musicians and readers and Melville. I mean, we just did everything. It was crazy. And that then led us to believe that we could be open to the museum for late nights. And we do 20 programs to 30 programs a night, and we really understand the framework. So we think about all ages, and you'll be there at 10 o'clock at night and still see toddlers. And the exciting thing is that now between 2,000 and 7,000 people will come on a Friday night. 2,000 and 7,000 people. But it takes time to invest in this and build up. And you're only, 5 or 6 miles from downtown, and you have neighborhoods all around you. So, with patience and the right programming to your audience, you can begin to see some of these changes. And you already have them coming for your Friday night film series, so now just begin to expand that. So this is what late night looks like in terms of the programming and special events, and the staff really have this down. And if you haven't been there for a late night, come on down is what I'd say. But again, it's all people at all times. There is music and food, I will admit. But the main thing is to get people into the galleries looking at works of art. And a lot of trustees challenged me and said, nobody's going to go upstairs and look at works of art. And then I would take them up there and they would see them and they'd go, wow, it really is happening. So this just gives you an overview. And the other area that we focused on, of course, was technology. This is what visitors use today, and you need to, both on the web and handhelds and all of this, begin to think about your collections and the visitor experience in new ways, and how to extend it beyond both before and beyond what would have been. So we did, whatever you do on your website, you have a very good website, but it's all part of the experience. It's all part of, that's how people make decisions to come. I can tell you that when we did the King Tut show, we had never touched Facebook. And in 2010, when there was, I forget all the things, the ticketing system crashed and everything that you don't want to have happen on your closing weekend happened. And visitors were lined up around the block in circles, and you said, where have you been for 6 months? Why didn't you come earlier? But they're standing out there in the cold, and we had to provide food and sell food. And I mean, it was just a nightmare. But in the end, we used Facebook as one of the ways to say, you know, we're going to extend our hours. We can't handle all of you all at this time. And so come on down, but be patient when you get here. And now that we use, then one day I went on this new thing, this was a long time ago, called Flickr. And then I found out, oh my God, all of this stuff had been posted on Flickr and Facebook and all these other websites that was not supposed to be posted, or I was going to be taken to rights and reproduction prison forever. And so we had to begin to filter all of this and figure all of this out and have our own website, and then our visitors could have their websites. I mean, it's just a whole brave new world out there that we began to participate and explore in one thing after another. And we have blogs, I mean, you know, the Uncrated, and tell these behind-the-scenes stories, which, as we know, people really, really love. So overall, the things that I took away is that the research and understanding of who is coming to you is critical. And how you want to engage in that experience, in our, as I said to Charles, and the senior staff, I wanted to focus on the collections because it's our hugest, most important asset, and build a relationship between our visitors and our collections and change the way they come to the museum. So we started out at under 300,000 visitors, and I honestly think we counted docents and staff a lot when when I was there. And visitors weren't going to the collection, weren't going to the special exhibitions as much as we wanted them to. So how do you change that practice? And when I left, we had 700,000 visitors. So it was a huge arc, not always perfect. There were ups and downs. We stayed true to our mission. We worked tirelessly as staff to share a vision and to argue about it and then to try experiments. We never gave up because there were high points and low points in all of this. We took time to evaluate and make sure that things were going well, and when they weren't, we would do course corrections. So we might have a plan for the year, but then we'd go, oh gosh, that's not really working out. Or in the year of Tut, we had the everything happened except for locusts. That's all I can say about that show. You know, the only thing we didn't have that year, we had a hurricane that was stopping some of the works of art being delivered. You know, that was the beginning of that show, and we had one of those huge viruses that stopped all the schools from coming for 3 weeks. I mean, it was just one thing, the worst ice storms ever. Yeah, it was just, you know, the plagues of Egypt. And I'd wake up in the morning and just say, why is this happening to us? But, you know, but even with King Tut, we did a whole series of programs and a huge amount of multimedia that took the themes in the King Tut show of the tombs and of Passage of Life and all of that, and took them up and got the visitors to go up into the galleries. And the great benefit was when we had these huge lines, we could push people up there to go have different experiences, and they were very, very grateful. So those were some of the things it took a long time, a lot more time than I thought it would. And being true to ourselves and being a place of experiments and possibilities, we tried that. So I'm just going to look at the time, 7:13. 7:13? Okay. And stop, because the next chapter we don't have time for, which is the new research that I'm doing on about art and healing and the importance of our collections and the importance of museums to transform the way in which we deal as a civic responsibility to the people in our community, and the important role of healing, and how so many works of art in the collection really share that information and can tell stories that people who are in recovery, whether it's chronic illness or cancer or mental depression, we should be doing more than we're doing now, and that's as Charles has heard over and over again, my mission. So with that, I'll stop.
Well, thank you very much, Bonnie. Before we open up the floor for questions, which I'm sure there's lots of them, Bonnie and I overlapped for literally about a year and a half when I left to go to the Cleveland Museum of Art. And I was a curator and a deputy director there. And, my ancient now memory of the Dallas Museum of Art was a museum that had spent, 40 years becoming this exceedingly professional, place that acquired extraordinary art, that knew how to do big exhibitions, that had become a museum to be taken sort of seriously in the serious, uber-serious museum world out there. And I remember the first conversations we had, Bonnie had come from a much more experiential, I would say, museum in San Francisco. And some of the conversations with curators who had been there a long time, I'd been there, like 16 years. I wasn't exactly a newcomer, but certainly was very interested in embracing the world of visitors and doing more and trying to get more people to attend. And remembering the sort of dead stares and silence about the world I loved as a curator was going away. And for just a minute, I'd love to kind of take you back to the beginning of what was always a great experiment and a great experiential journey, I suppose. But to talk just a little bit about, having worked at all these wonderful museums, you know better than any of us how the sort of traditional world that the museums have, we've all built post-World War II, and now we've come to another moment. And they're very starkly different in some ways.
And what I want to say, why do I remember those meetings? Oh my God. I thought I was going to be stoned or,
Burned at the stake.
Burned at the stake, yeah. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And the reality is I think that if you go back and read the mission statements of the Met or the Museum of Fine Arts. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's me. Thank you. I'm sorry. Am I still? Yes, I'm still live. Thank you very much. When you go back and think about the founding of museums, they are fundamentally educational institutions. And secondly, in the 1960s, we got tax-exempt status to be educational institutions. So to me, it is absolutely fundamental that we remain in this safe place, because otherwise all of our tax the good things that come with being a nonprofit will be ripped away from us, and then you have to pay for everything like a regular corporate entity, which would bankrupt a lot of museums, and also change our civic responsibilities. So I'm very happy to see this kind of shift into this parallel universe, which is about the great collections that we have and making them totally accessible to the community. But Charles is right. I interviewed all the staff in different divisions and then went on to understand what were a couple of the key things that would make a difference for the staff and try to raise money for those. One of them was an elevator. You know, who knew that we needed another elevator? But we did, and it was really important to everybody that we get this, both for the movement of collections, but also for the visitor experience, because they get trapped in the museum and couldn't figure their way out. The hard part was exactly what you talked about, which was a changing culture, and how do you get a staff that had not that had very successfully created a beautiful museum, and that there was a deep sense of ownership and scholarship and understanding of a particular audience to embrace this amount of change in 2 years. And that was my job, and it was very, very hard. And a lot of things had to happen, not only creating a shared vision, and I call it the summer of discontent, when everybody got in the room. It was just after Charles left, but and we created the framework for engaging with the curators, the educators, marketing, development, and there was no amount of screaming that wasn't possible because people just fundamentally disagreed on what we came up with, but everybody agreed, okay, well, we'll try this. We'll see what the research says. And there was a lot of change, and if I can use the boat metaphor. Do you think that would help, that I told you about? Where every morning I went through security and pushed that button and went up to my office up above, and boy, there were a lot of days I knew we had a boat, but we weren't all on the boat. And then other days we had paddles, and we were beating each other up with the paddles. and then there were days that had the paddles and we had the boat, but we really didn't know where we were going, so we would row in two directions. And then there was one day when I realized, after a lot of work, that we were in the boat, we had the paddles, we shared a sense of where we were going, and we were going to all paddle together that day. And that took 2.5, almost 3 years before that happened. And we got through the great centennial celebrations at the museum. So it took a lot of examples, and that's what I really want to say. It's examples of excellence and innovation that then the staff and the board said, well, you know, maybe this is the right direction, and we're gonna get on board. And one of our colleagues and friends hated the idea, for example, of 100 hours, Charlie Wiley, and he would say this to his death: I hate this idea. People are going to destroy the museum. We're going to be open 100 hours.
Senior curator of
contemporary art. And then he said, everything's going to be destroyed. And who are these people anyhow? Well, you know.
Great unwashed.
Yeah, great unwashed, and I'm here to tell you that one night, there's this, one of the group of people actually got down and messed up the candy room, where there's what a tourist does, you know, all of these green candies, and
Felix Gonzalez Torres.
Felix Gonzalez Torres, and they got in there and made angel wings in the Felix Gonzalez Torres. And I didn't know how to tell Charlie this the next morning, but the guards and I just got in there and we just sort of brushed it off back. And I called the head prep and said, come on down, we got to fix this up before Charlie walks in the morning. And we did, and guess what? You know, it didn't nothing got killed that night. And yes, it was at probably 3 o'clock in the morning, and could it not have happened? Yes, but the world didn't end. You know, it was candy. And so Charlie then saw all these people coming into the museum, and he was just amazed at, you know, all ages, all backgrounds, people with children at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, Charlie, if you don't believe me, come on down. And so he did, and it was extraordinary to see the city become participants in the museum. And I just believe that with reasonable risk and new programming, and that's one of the things I would say is, as you're looking ahead, programming is really critical, and alignment between programming and marketing and curatorial initiatives are an issue. You have great spaces, you have great resources, and your team just needs to be, encouraged to continue to work collaboratively from the very top under Charles and your senior staff all the way down to the security staff.
So there must be questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Just for the record, there are lots of curators who will stay up all night to see people.
Absolutely. When I gave this talk,
Go Curators, absolutely.
3 a.m., 4 a.m., we'll be there with you.
we'll be there.
And there were curators at Dallas
Absolutely.
who were
And they
very,
were there.
very intrigued and supportive and worked their
another
hands off to make all this happen.
Yeah, Dorothy Kaczynski, who was one of the other senior curators, and Rosalind Walker. I mean, there was a huge battery of them that were my full participants. And after you have enough great examples, then everybody got on board. So yeah, I mean, I love it. I'm an impossible person. We were open round the clock. They'd all say, when are we going to do it this year? And because people love it, and so we would find occasions to be open round the clock, and it was important to the community.
Any questions? Yes, right there.
One quick observation and then a quick question. And listening to you talk about the all night, which I think is great, it struck me that I think we naturally are having that as a privileged conversation. And what I like about your tagline is that, for people who aren't able to access the
Right.
museum at other hours,
Right.
it's up all night for people who work normal daytime hours.
Right.
It's prime time access to the museum for people who work second and third shifts who otherwise are never going to be able to come during regular hours. So that was one moment of self-awareness for me. My question for you is, either in your research or your experience, when we talk about the art of the museum, did your research or your experience explore the consideration set of the arts and how some people are choosing to spend their time at the museum versus other arts? Did you try to do crossover enticement of here's somebody who's a participant in another discipline, how do we bring them in with all
Yeah.
the wonderful connections and programs you have going on?
We tried a lot of that and did a lot of those experiments. The exciting thing is that I'm here to tell you that, in the middle of the night, you'd be surprised who came on down. It was taxi drivers and doctors and nurses and, all these people that live on a different clock, as well as people in recovery who couldn't sleep, parents who had twins who they couldn't get them to sleep, and so they put them in the car and came on down. I mean, it was just, you saw everybody there, and it wasn't, and it changed the nature of the way the museum was perceived in the community. We have the same transportation problems that you do, which is at least when we started, we don't have good public transportation in Dallas. It's a car society. People get confused, and when we started off, it was dangerous to come to where we were. It was an absolute perception because the arts district hadn't been filled in. So there was a lot of concern about, is it safe enough for me to come on down? So we had to bridge that, just like you have to bridge that 4-mile gap. We had the same thing. Who wants to go downtown and to Dallas in the middle of the night? That's a very scary proposition. The other thing is we did create partners, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, with other cultural institutions and with our outreach partners. And so Avance and all of these other groups that we worked with deeply in the museum were important for us to, whether they were Spanish-speaking or whether they were, the Dallas Theater Center is one of our great partners. The reason we did Superman at one point, we did superheroes, is because they did the play about Superman, and so we took the advantage of that to tell all the superhero stories that were going on in our collection. So we found that there was real crossover between audiences. We recently did that with the Rothko. They did the Rothko show that was on Broadway, and then we did a lot of work around Rothko and the abstract expressionists in the museum. So but those are, you're exactly right, those are your participants and enthusiasts, and more so than any other group that are going to do those crossover programs. Yes.
Yeah, Brent.
A number of years ago, there was a study done, I think, at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I can't remember the name of the woman who did it. It was her doctoral dissertation. Staging of development. I'm sure you've made it 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But her study suggested that
Mhm.
next level, that people have to go through. It's the rate of the way people learn to love and understand art. Number one, are you familiar with that general concept anyway? And and do you agree with it?
No. Well, for two reasons. I think looking at beautiful things is a natural part of living, and all we need to do is give more access. I don't believe you start. I mean, if you're talking about learning art history, and I have to know all this baseline to be able to go to the next line and the next line level and the next level, yeah, that's important. But having worked for 20, 30 years of my life with collectors, I can talk to Howard Wachowski, who is one of the great international collectors of contemporary art. He doesn't know diddly squat about, African art. So what makes that kind of food chain going up? But he loves looking at African art. Picasso loved looking at African art. So what makes that impossible to do in that you have to go through these steps? If there are aesthetic or human responses, and this is the new work that I'm really getting into about the narrative of art, then I think you have more access points. And I don't think that you have to sort of like school work your way up through a progression. I'm much more excited, and I've spent my life getting people to enter where they are and then connect to the world, connect to the work of art that's in front of them, and then connect that to the world around them. And if you can do those three simple steps, you have created a memory for that person that they will take forever, and they may never forget that work of art. So, yeah, I come from a different, more experiential school, and I'm less, it depends on how much quote-unquote content you feel riveted to make. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I come from I access that because I want people to fall in love and be passionate and remember to come back. And I'm not always sure. I'm dyslexic, and so, getting to the 12th grade was really hard, and getting out of school was even harder. It's like, whatever avenue was different, that was the avenue that I wanted to take. So I'm not a good ladder climber. I'm sorry, Brett.
Yes, right here in Pratt.
Hi, I am here not as an IMA staff member, but as an IMA member and fan of the DMA. I'm a graduate from the SMU Meadows.
Wow.
And I understand that you're on the advisory board of the new National Center for Arts Research. So
Right.
I was wondering if you could speak about that since it's new to the field and what museums can do to use that as a resource. Is it something that museums can initiate inquiry, or do museums wait for studies to be released?
Well, when I get home, I'm going to send Charles the link to it because it is at SMU in the business school, Cox Business School, combined with their art school. They set up this new center for research around art organizations, and they pulled together studies from the National Endowment for the Art, from the Pew Charitable Trust, from all these, from the Theater Center, from the Art Museum Directors Association, and they're beginning to analyze their statistics to understand funding and demographics and audience. These are drawn from existing surveys. They've already published, and you can go to SMU and look up, it's not NASCAR like you spell it, but it's a slightly different version. And it provides, they've published, I think, 4 research studies right now that are currently out, and they're looking at trending. So you're taking data that exists and beginning to look at trending in operating costs and in management, more management-based issues. So yes, museums are participants, and I think when they've only been in existence, we've raised about $2 million for the center to get it launched and to support this launch of research. And so we have enough funding for a couple of years, and we're hoping some really big donors will come in and carry it forward after we've gotten it launched. So it's a brand new initiative, and yes, I think they're going to be doing more and more great studies. Several have already been mentioned in the New York Times and the Washington Post because they're looking at the trending. One example is of federal dollars that are invested in the impact that they have on theaters and museums and other kinds of organizations. Well, they did not do the one on gender. No. Mm-mm. That was a study published by the American Association of Art Museum Directors. Is that the one you're talking about?
I'm not sure. I just thought I saw it through that news feed.
Yeah, they helped to provide, but the real big study was done about gender disparity and pay, and that was done by the Art Museum Directors. That's AAMD. So that was a different study. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question. Marty?
Sounds to me like you've done a wonderful job of publicity to get the people of Dallas to know what you're doing. Will you give us any hints? PR for
Great question. Well, it's like anybody who does branding is going to tell you that you can do all the publicity in the world, whether it's digital or visitors on the street or spending money on the all too expensive ads in newspapers and on radio. But if you don't deliver the product when the visitor comes, then you failed. So that coherence of experience between what you tell people, why they should come, and the experience that they have when they're in their building has to be seamless. And that was the piece that we had to really, really, really work on, the whole transition. Because we spent, as Charles knows, a huge amount of money on advertising and television. Television in Dallas is still a very big way to market and sell new products and new exhibitions. It's just one of the things, whereas the newspaper isn't as much as it used to be. And now digital media and how you make that really a key part of your sales aspect has to be much more incorporated into the planning. And, even 3 years ago, it wasn't what it is today. So just like all things, whatever you think you understand, it's all going to change. But the main comment I would make to you is that you can advertise all you want, but if the visitor does not have a great experience when they come into your institution and you fail to deliver on that, they will, just like in the regular commercial world, they won't buy your product again. And they'll tell 10 people, this is one of the things that we learned, they'll tell 10 or 20 people it was really bad. And then you go, oh golly, that takes a lot of time to sweep up and make better. So you want to be thinking simultaneously about the two, what the experience is and how it's delivered, and then how you tell the message.
Thank you, Bonnie. Very, very helpful. And thank you all for coming.